Hi, everybody. Welcome tonight. I want to also welcome our people who are watching virtually. So we're so fortunate tonight that people are able to join us, and this will be available as well on our archives on our website if you want to review it. But for you who are here live, this is really a special evening. Joyce Maynard is here to talk about her novel, her latest novel, How the Light Gets In, which is a follow up to her last one. I'm not going to talk about it because that's for her to do, but I just want to say that anytime Joyce comes out with something, we just are so thrilled and we welcome her to Book Passage all the time. We love having her, and we really appreciate all of you being here to support her and to support us. So without further ado, please welcome Joyce Maynard.
I see a lot of old friends here and new ones too. I always feel my books make me friends. Probably make me a few enemies too, just occurred to me, but I don't really think about enemies. Everybody can hear me okay, right? So there's so much to talk about. And also, I want to say that I want to hear from you tonight. I never want to, I never consider a book event me holding forth. So I have some things to say, big surprise, and I'm going to share a little bit of this book. I never want to take up too much of our very precious time reading, but I can't resist sharing a little bit. But I'm going to trust you that you'll have a lot to say too. It won't be about this book probably because unless you've been reading all day, you couldn't possibly, it just came out yesterday. Um, there actually was a woman who reported that she had finished the book. It's 500 pages. I don't know. Um, uh, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but I'm going to trust that you have a lot to say too. And I have to tell you that I feel I've been a writer for my entire adult life. I published my first book. This is a, a somewhat shocking statistic. 51 years ago, I was 19. You can do the math. But actually, I'd already been writing for years before then. So I feel very, very lucky that I've gotten to do this thing that I love all my life. And I owe a lot of it to you. I really am a writer whose career and life has been made possible by readers. So thank you. I really mean it. Thank you. Um, I also would have to say that there's only one complaint that I have about my line of work. Well, sometimes it's been a little rough paying the bills, but I wouldn't have changed that. Um, uh, it's a very lonely thing to be a writer a lot of the time. There's just no two ways about it. You have to be alone. You cannot you can't be out in the world doing this, and so I'm by myself a lot. I'm not entirely by myself because I'm with my characters, and this could sound a little creepy, but they do become I get quite attached to them, and then I miss them when it's over. But the moment when I finish a book and I get to go out in the world and like put on clothes other than yoga pants and and talk to real life people is so exciting. So if I'm a little wired up, forgive me. It's day 2 and I'm still just so excited to get to be with you and share this book and hear back from you. I always say that I consider my books to be one half of a conversation, and you provide the other half. So it doesn't have to be about this book. It probably won't be about this book, but I really want to hear what's on your mind. As Allison mentioned, this is the sequel to my novel that's I'm sure they have it. You can buy it. Count the Ways. But you don't have to have read Count the Ways. Of course, I think it's an excellent idea to read Count the Ways. But I want to assure you that if you didn't read Count the Ways, you can just dive right in with this one, and then you'll really want to go back and read Count the Ways probably. Um, And maybe I'll start out by telling you how I came to write this book, because although I have published 19 books at this point in my many years as a writer, I've never written a sequel before. Um, and when I wrote Count the Ways, I wish I had known when I was writing that book that I was going to write a sequel, or I would have set a few things up a little better. I had to do some sort of, you can't retrofit a novel for your sequel. I didn't intend to ever go back to those characters again. And it was you, maybe not literally the people in this room, maybe even a few of them are in this room, who told me that I wasn't done with this story. I got a lot of letters after Count the Ways came out in the summer of 2021. And I didn't get to go on a book tour. I didn't get to come to Book Passage. I hated not being on a book tour. And so this is actually my first book tour in a long time, because Bird Hotel, I couldn't do it either. But I got a lot of letters from people who were really upset. And more than 5 said that they threw the book on the ground. And they did pick it up afterwards. But what they said was that that I couldn't leave that character, Eleanor, the main character, the woman who is not me, but she does bear a certain resemblance to me. Um, um, uh, and I mean it. She's really not me, but the span of years that is covered by these 2 books is exactly my span. So she was born in 1953. So was I. And we carry her all the way through the spring of 2024. I finished the book before the spring of 2024, but I was extremely optimistic that we would still have a world in spring of 2024. And if we didn't, the fact that I had made a mistake with my book wasn't going to be a big problem in the scale of things. I had never written a sequel, but I got all these letters saying, this woman, Eleanor, she's always, when does she get her turn? She sacrifices herself again and again. She protects her husband from the fact that he had an affair with their babysitter, and then the children get mad at her. She gives away their farm. She's always thinking about everybody else, but never herself. She's this victim. She's this self-sacrificing woman. Why did you do this? And I wrote back and said, because that's what a lot of women do. And it is not my job as a writer to present a picture of the way we should behave and the way life should be, but that is a thing that many women do, especially women raising children. They put their needs last. They might even forget what their needs are. There's a scene in, I can't even remember if it's Count the Ways or How the Light Gets In, where her husband, Cam, is going off to do some fun thing. He's riding his mountain bike. He's playing sports. And she says, they have 3 young children. And she says, when does it get to be my turn to have a morning off? And he says to her words that are pretty tough, but not inaccurate. You wouldn't know what to do with a morning to yourself if you had one. I actually did hear those words spoken to me once, and they were true. And so I didn't want to leave you with a woman who hasn't had enough fun. And she's going to have, I have to say that I couldn't just give you a happily ever after story of the next stretch in Eleanor's life between 55 and 70. More hard things will happen, as they do in life. And also, it would be a rather boring book if I didn't give you some of those. But this is Eleanor finally getting to look around. Her children are gone. She's on her own, and ask, what do I need for me? And I'm happy to say that I know that story too, and it's a good one, and it's hard-earned, and there's no way to jump ahead to it without going through some of those other, well, maybe there is, maybe the next generation or 2 generations down can figure that one out, but I never did. So this is, the story began in Count the Ways with Eleanor as a very young girl, falling in love, passionate love affair, marriage to Cam, this very charming woodworker, makes bowls out of wood burls from trees, and they go on to have 3 children, as I did, although I was very careful and clear to make those children very different from my three children. Um, uh, and they settle on a farm in New Hampshire, as I did. I will say that the farm that I describe in this book is a farm that I really know, and a farm that I lived in, and a farm where a few babies that I happen to know quite well were born, and a farm that is now a yoga retreat belonging to my ex-husband, but no problem there. Um, um, so Count the Ways followed her through the end of her marriage and the years after, very difficult years. And her husband goes off with their babysitter and she's on her own. And when we pick up the story, for reasons that there will be no spoilers tonight, I promise you. If I tell you some things about this book, they're going to be things that won't mess up your experience of it at all. When we pick up with the story, she is back on the farm and living with her son, Toby, who, if you read Count the Ways, you know, suffered a brain injury when he was not quite 5 years old in the pond that was on the family farm. And he's different. He's a different kind of a person because of that. I don't have a child with a traumatic brain injury, and we might talk about the idea of creating a character that doesn't, that is a very specific kind of character, and I worked hard to make him real, and I hope I succeeded. I've heard from some parents that he felt real. So she's back on the farm with Toby, who is now in his late 30s and raising goats, and really great. I regard him as sort of the heart and soul of this book, Toby. And I won't tell you all the things that happen, but I will say that Eleanor gets her time. I took a whole year before deciding to write a sequel to think about what I wanted to happen in her life. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I want to happen in my life, but I had some theories about what should happen in my life, many of which didn't happen. I knew that she was due a really passionate romance, love affair, but I also knew that I didn't want a partner to be the answer to everything in her life, that's not who she is. She has to find that for herself. I was really interested, I'll just tell you that I thought a lot about the fact that Toby's brain is injured, but his heart is just fine, in fact, bigger than many. And I wanted him to have a love. He desperately wants to be in love. And I thought, what can I do for Toby? What would be a believable thing for Toby? And I won't tell you what I came up with, but I'm pretty happy with what I came up with. When we meet him, he's obsessed with Scarlett Johansson, and he's sending letters that are just addressed Scarlett Johansson, Hollywood. Anyway, these characters, as you can maybe tell, are very dear to me. There's some problematic ones too. There's some new ones that you don't know from Count the Ways that you're going to meet. I think and of course the children, Eleanor's three children are now in their 40s, late 30s and 40s. Her son, Al, was originally her daughter and has transitioned. She would have thought that was the big challenge and maybe, struggle and maybe even tragedy of the family's life. It is not. He's doing really well. The big surprise for her was that her middle child, Ursula, her daughter, with whom she had been extraordinarily close, is estranged from her. And it's not what this book is about, but I will say that that's an important piece of the story, and it was an important piece for me to put in. One of the things that I have been fortunate to have been given in my life is the stories of women. Women have trusted me with their stories. I've been hosting memoir retreats for women, and there are several women here I'm so happy to see who have been there in a very unlikely place, a small Mayan indigenous village on the shores of a most gorgeous lake surrounded by volcanoes in Guatemala. And I see some alumni here today of those workshops. And women come there and often tell me and tell each other things they've never told anybody um, ever. And there's something about being in that place and away from the familiar that makes it possible. And that's part of what I've tried to do, is make space for women to explore those stories, and nobody should have to be given permission to tell their story. But here's an interesting phenomenon, and it's one of the reasons why I have the character of Ursula. In the first probably 15 years of teaching my memoir workshops, I bet I met 4 women who had the story of an adult child, a beloved adult child, who no longer spoke to them, grandchildren that they didn't see. I didn't know all the background of their stories, but I could see that while I had no doubt they made mistakes as mothers, these were devoted, loving mothers. I'd heard about the other kind of mothers too, because one of the things people do when they come to a memoir workshop, they tend to talk about their mother. And the ones who had had unspeakable abuse, who might legitimately have said, I think I just will cut my mother out of my life, seldom did that. But in the first 15 years, I heard from maybe 4 women. In the last 10 years, this is a completely anecdotal, this is not a scientific study, I think I have met and come to know well the stories of at least 60 women. And I am very committed to saying this in a group like this, because I know that there is somebody in this room, and probably more than one person in this room, who has had that experience. And part of that experience is extraordinary shame and isolation and guilt. It's almost inevitable that if you hear of somebody whose child doesn't speak to them, you will ask yourself, as I might once have done, what terrible thing did she do? And that's another part of the hard experience of those women. And if you're fortunate enough not to be one of those women, I think it's important to know that the answer is there but for the grace of God, that it is possible to be a very loving, very devoted parent who didn't do everything right, but sure tried her hardest, and still have a birthday and a holiday and many other days pass by with silence from a child. And I happen to be one of those women myself. And so it was very important for me to acknowledge that without shame and embarrassment, not without, having experienced great sorrow, but also, as with many losses in life, just to find, to come out the other end and find some kind of wisdom and redemption from it. And so that's not what this book is about, but the character of Ursula is still estranged from Eleanor in the new book. And I'm actually going to read you the passage that I'm going to read you. Refers in some ways to that. It's a chapter called The Definition of a Good Mother. She's having a conversation with her son, Toby. I just wanted to tell you how glad I am you're my son, she tells Toby now. How proud I am of what a good man you turned out to be. You turned out to be a good mother, Toby says. A good mother. Who even knows what that is? For 9 months you carry a child in your body. Then you give birth to this person, and they depend on you, for a while anyway, for every single thing in their life, including their survival. What they need? Not only food, warmth, safety, diapers, baths, sunshine, fresh air, milk, also comfort, reassurance, protection, encouragement, vigilance, stamina, compassion. Money, love. You teach them what bread is, and milk, and a ball, a dog, a helicopter, a tree, a car, a lawnmower, a cell phone, a gun. They look to you to tell them about everything, basically. The whole wide world, the meaning of everything, as if you knew. Every year, On their birthday, you bake a cake for this person you gave birth to, and at Christmas you fill their stocking after driving around for hours in terrible traffic, probably a blizzard, to find the one toy they want more than any other. You teach them letters, numbers, colors, the names of vegetables, how to ride a bicycle, how to swim, how to make friends, what sex is. You teach them that someday everybody dies, but in their case, you pray, not for a very long time. You teach them what's the right thing to do, how to treat people. When they get this wrong, you give them another chance, many. You take them places. You make sure they get home. You tuck them into bed every night, and maybe sometimes they wake up with a bad dream, which means you need to be there once again to tell them it's all right, even if it isn't always going to be. You need to say it. Here is this thing called life, you say. Now go out into the world and live yours. I'll be here looking out for you, no matter what. I'll be here. It's an impossible job. How is anybody going to get it right? You won't, of course. You will definitely screw up and possibly fail miserably. Your child will suffer disappointments, some caused by you. You promised to stay married to her father, but you didn't. You told her life was fair, but it isn't. You wanted her to believe people were mostly good. Then someone really bad came along, or just someone who hurts them badly. Your child will be angry at you sometimes. You may be angry at her too, but because you're the parent you're not supposed to be. One day you may pour a glass of wine over your head or stuff a fancy cake you just finished making into the garbage. You may go crazy now and then. You may get angry at your children's father. You may say things you wish you hadn't. This child you've raised may forgive you, or she may not. On Mother's Day, she may send you a card telling you what a great mother you are, the best ever. She may send you a text message informing you that as a victim of toxic parenting, she has recognized her profound need for boundaries. She may inform you in this text message that this will be her final communication with you. She's severing your relationship. Don't call, don't write. No, she does not want to go into therapy with you. She may break your heart. You're a bad mother. You're a good mother. You used to be a good mother, but now you aren't anymore. You were a bad mother, but maybe you can make it up to this child whose life you ruined. You didn't get to be a mother. You did, but you wished you didn't. You wish you could do it over, but you can't. You were given this person to take care of. Egg, sperm, 9 months gestation, labor, the easy part. It's all the rest that got you in trouble. As hard as you tried, your efforts were never enough. None ever can be. You turned out to be a good mother, Toby tells Eleanor now. Well, she's a mother, that's all. That's as much as Eleanor's prepared to say about herself on the subject at this point, about her performance on the job. I did the best I could, she thinks, but not even that. She could have tried harder, could have done better, could have given more. When in the life of a mother is that not true? And you know, I see men here, and I'm so glad to see you. And I have to say that although I speak of mothers, it can be fathers too. And I don't ever want to exclude men from the discussion. It's basically about parenthood. And I'd like to think, in fact, I do think you don't have to be a parent to like my books. Of course, I want the maximum audience that I possibly can for my books, but I mean it. I think you, and I've heard people say, oh, you know, you're a woman's writer. I guess if you think that only women care about relationships, family, home, love, the beating heart, then do you think only women care about those things? That would be very insulting to men, and I don't believe that. So I'm going to say this is a book for anybody in this room, parent or not, male or female, young or old. It's not the first book I've written about marriage and divorce and parenthood and family. I guess it's one of my obsessions and themes, and it doesn't get old. There's always new things to find in that story. But it's the first time I wrote about it from the age that I am now. And I know so many things now that I didn't know when I was a mere 55. I turned 70 last November, and it's the book that I wrote the book that I wished I could have read when I was 40. So that's what this is. I want to, on a completely different note, before we get to your questions, I want to mention another aspect of this book that's really important to me. And I know that I'm going to get criticized for this. And even a couple of people, even before it came out, had started just reading the description of it in, Publishers Weekly or whatever, had started saying it. They said, oh, I really like your writing, but why do you have to be political? So I want to say something about that. I am a person who follows closely what's going on in our country and has strong political views. I don't put those in my novels. That's not what you buy my books for, to find out, which candidate I support. I tell stories, but I don't know how you set a story in the years 2010 to 2024 and not look at what was going on in the world through the lens of the characters who were living it. So yes, I talk about the election of a man that's going to be out on the debate stage in a couple of nights. But I don't talk about it in terms of what I think about that person. I talk about it with a story of a dinner party that Eleanor throws for all her friends to celebrate in November of 2016, to celebrate what she strongly believes is going to be the election of the first woman president. And she bakes a really great chocolate cake that nobody eats. That's not me being political. That's me being American. And that's me creating characters who live in the world. And we all are living in a world that includes politics and climate change and social media and questions of gender identity that didn't exist when, or they may have existed, but we didn't talk about them when I published my first book when I was 19, and every single writer on the list with me, most of whom are dead, was white. Life is political, is what I would say to that. And probably, truthfully, to an audience in Marin County, I'm not going to get a lot of blowback on the fact that this is taking place. But I will just say, I'm an American writer, and I want to write about life in America as experienced by ordinary people and as experienced in kitchens and living rooms and bedrooms. There's actually, incidentally, there's a character in this book. He's the husband of the estranged daughter, Jake, and he's a character I like. He's a basketball coach who loses his job and starts drinking a whole lot, and he begins to buy into a bunch of conspiracy theories that are going around. And he's an angry man. He's a man who adores his wife, adores his children, and he ends up driving a truck to our nation's capital on January 6th with a baseball bat in the seat next to him. And I didn't want to make him a villain. It is my job as a writer, and I take it very seriously, to try and understand every single character in my books. And in At Home in the World, that included J.D. Salinger, and in Labor Day, it included a woman who meets a convict on the run at a Walmart going back to school shopping and brings him back to her house with her 13-year-old son. I want you to understand, I want to help you imagine how a person could get in those situations. I actually love that character too, Jake. And it was kind of an interesting, not kind of, it was a very interesting exercise to give myself the challenge of writing that guy. Um, I could keep on talking, but I would so much rather hear from you. So if this proves to be a recalcitrant bunch, I'll, continue rambling on. But what's on your mind, please? This is really what I came to Book Passage for, is to hear from you.
So I'm going to pass a mic around and we'll get to as many questions as we can. I just wanted to say thank you for reading that beautiful passage. It kind of gives me chills. And yeah.
I have to say about that passage, I had said, because there were, some friends of mine, some women who knew that I had put the estrangement story in this book, and they said, "What are you going to do about that? Are you going to talk about that?" And the easy thing to do would have been to say, I teach memoir workshops and I hear these stories. And so that was sort of my plan, but I kind of know myself too. And I actually made a decision a long time ago that I have this, I occupy this odd spot that hasn't always been comfortable of being out there, shining a light on things that some people don't feel able to talk about, but I do. And
well, thank you for that. It's very, very important. And I think writers like you, we appreciate so much for being able to say things that open up that space for people. And
that's my intent.
As a woman, a mother, and a daughter, that piece, however I related to it, was very powerful. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think we had a question over here.
Yes.
Yeah. And say your name if you could.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I'm really excited to be here. And I just want to say that your piece especially resonated with me because my memoir is all about family. And I was a single mom with 4 kids. And, well, I kind of still am. But I understood what you were going through. In every single book that I've ever read that you've written, whether it's fiction or memoir, it's always about real people that you can relate to. And it always inspires me to be a better storyteller and writer. And the name of my book is How Do I Explain This to My Kids? It is, because every time something happens, it's like, well, how the heck do I explain this? So I just want to thank you for inspiring all of us.
Thank you.
And that's all I need to say. So
questions?
Someone up here.
Well, this isn't a question.
What's your name?
My name is Jane.
Jane.
And just a statement. I attended a workshop of yours in Lafayette many years ago. I don't know.
Okay, I was trying to think. I knew you from somewhere.
And I just ran into Chris, and we reminisced about that. She thought you guys were panicked because you ran out of food and running into the kitchen to get more food.
I never run out of food.
And
I had a Jewish mother.
And
Excuse
that's what
me.
I said. I didn't remember that.
You were in a different house, not mine.
We have a different story. But
I don't know.
What I remembered was you
were at some Protestant house.
Exactly. Exactly. I remember you telling me at the end, I was telling Chris this earlier, that I should really write the story of how I was going to be a professional tennis player and I broke my back. And I've been thinking about that ever since. I am finally have the time and going to get to that story.
Do I ever have a writing workshop for you?
But the comment more is also what you left me, because I'm not a writer. I mean, I like to write for myself and I will write more. You impressed upon me in that workshop, brings tears to my eyes. You said just be authentic and be honest, go deep, and you've got to be honest with yourself no matter what. And that has stayed with me in my life, just beyond my writing, but just my entire life. That has stayed with me. So thank you.
Well, go and write that story. It has been a gift in my life that I get to teach. I won't even say teach, support and mentor women in the telling of their stories, and sometimes men, but mostly women.
Well, I think, I see one over here. I was just going to say that talking about being honest and real and authentic, I noticed as you were reading, and even as you talk, so many people in the room, including myself, are like nodding, yes, yes, yes. So it's relate. Everybody can relate to what you're saying.
And I know you from somewhere.
Yes, from San Francisco, from that workshop.
Oh, okay. Yes, great.
From those 18 hours.
Yes, that's right.
Which was phenomenal.
Oh.
Gosh, that I remember so many
There's
things.
for those who don't have the ability to go to Guatemala to my week-long workshop, I created a series of online writing classes that had a live studio. Remind me your name.
Natasha.
Natasha, that Natasha was part of. It was this really snazzy San Francisco startup that spared no expense. So it was like this beautiful studio, these 3 cameras. They went broke. They don't exist anymore. But you can still get those classes, and I recommend them. It's called Creative Live. And if you just Google and so it's 18 hours of me, if you can believe it. That would be some people's idea of a nightmare. But it's a lot of really good writing instruction. And
That's great.
Yeah. So good. Now you've solved the problem. I knew you.
Yeah, so I'm curious how living in an indigenous town has changed you.
Oh, what a huge question. And I will say that although I'm here talking about Count the Ways and how the light gets in, there's a book that I wrote in between the two of them, and I wrote it during the pandemic while I was at my home in Guatemala in this little village. I made a brilliant decision. I wasn't stuck in Guatemala, but I was there teaching a workshop when the pandemic happened, and I knew that that was a really great place to be, and it was. And I finished Count the Ways there. I had invited 2 young women who were in the workshop, who were both 32 years old. I called them the girls, to stay with me, and I figured we'd be together for a few weeks. We were there for 6 months that I consider, frankly, like the best 6 months of my life, probably. And we all worked very hard on our projects. And at the end of the day, we put on fancy dresses and lit candles and made a beautiful meal and sat outside looking out at the lake and the volcanoes. And I read out loud to them. And I first read from Count the Ways. And then I finished Count the Ways. And they said, okay, we need another story. So I wrote The Bird Hotel, which is set there. So I have had a relationship with Guatemala since I was 19 years old, when I went there on an orchid hunt. Crazy thing to do in the year 1973, when the Civil War was going on in America, and North America was not a welcome sight. But that place just sort of grabbed my heart. And in particular, I think it's spectacularly physically beautiful, but it's also the beauty of the Mayan culture. And that's been a huge teacher for me. And it's a big part of The Bird Hotel, which incidentally is a canceled book. When I wrote The Bird Hotel, I sent 2 books simultaneously, Count the Ways and Bird Hotel, to my editor. And they weren't even clear which one they were going to publish first. But in the interim between then and a year later, a book was published called American Dirt that you've probably heard about. I'm not going to criticize any writer for trying, maybe she does a good job, maybe just she does a bad job, but I'm never going to say they shouldn't get to try. So my publisher was no longer interested in publishing a book by a white woman set in a Central American country. It's an invented Central American country, because I was neither Hispanic nor indigenous. And I will add, I did not in any way appropriate the point of view of a Latina or indigenous woman. The main character in the book is a woman from San Francisco who, for reasons I won't go into, ends up in this very unlikely little town and starts running a hotel. It was a work of pure fiction and imagination when I wrote it, but I actually do now run a hotel in Guatemala. I was going to say don't ask, but you can ask. I'm very proud of the hotel. But and we built it actually during COVID, because though COVID never came to that village, there was desperate unemployment. And people were taking up collections, to buy rice and beans, and that didn't seem to be very sustainable. So I thought, I'll hire some men to do a few little building projects. And before you knew it, I had completely emptied my bank account, but a crew of 20 men had been employed for about 8 months, and they built 7 houses on the property. So I suddenly said, oh, I guess I'm running a hotel. And it is the most beautiful hotel on the lake. You've been there very recently, Michael, would you? Yeah. Several of you have been there, but you've been there very recently. Yeah. No, it's, yeah. So anyway, I didn't mean to be a plug for it, but it is. Since I'm talking about it, it's called Casa Paloma Retreat. Oh, you two have been there too. Yes, Tim and Deborah. Okay, so yes, many people have been there. The book was unpublishable. And I'm saying this in a bookstore. This is a serious problem going on, in my opinion. And I say this as a person who knows very well the world, the need in the publishing world that I remember in the all white days of, for diversity of voices. But think of all the books we would not have if every writer were now confined to telling the stories of the world and the culture that she inhabited, and if there were no more Anna Karenina. So I couldn't publish the book anywhere. I finally got the book published in France, and eventually a very small publisher in the United States published The Bird Hotel. And so it wasn't a book that had reviews or a book tour or much of anything going for it, but it has been a word of mouth book that actually has done better and better and is a kind of a book club book. So I love The Bird Hotel. The cover of The Bird Hotel is a detail of a painting by a Mayan indigenous man, a painter who I know very well. The full painting hangs on my wall at my house, and he's thrilled that his painting is on the cover. But then he opened the book and he flipped through it and he said, "Where are my other paintings?" And so anyway, and actually, speaking of artists, because I am a big supporter of artists, when this book was we were ready to have a cover for this book, my editor sent me a bunch of really boring pictures of, cute New England farmhouses, and none of them spoke to me, and I was just racking my brains. And suddenly I looked at the wall of my own house in New Hampshire, my little summer cabin that I go to write in the summer, and there was a painting on the wall made by a very dear friend of 45 years who is a painter who lived down the road. And this is a painting by my friend Danny Thibault of my real bedroom. My real bedroom doesn't look as pathetic as this, but I love this. And this might be the moment to say, I actually, for the first time ever, where's Jenny? I have merch. So I decided I loved this painting so much that I had T-shirts made. Jenny, would you model? I won't say that you're going to look as great in this shirt as Jenny, but this is the Where Love Goes. How the Light Gets In T-shirt, and this is Jenny, who is like everything in my world of making things work. And I'm going to make this offer that if a person hosts a book club of 15 or more people of this book, they will get their own limited edition How the Light Gets In T-shirt sent to them by Jenny. And you can always find me on my website. So more questions, please. Yes.
It sounds like you're doing wonderful workshops. And I just want to mention that I used to read your column that was in the Marin Independent Journal, and I was a faithful reader of that column for years.
Time ago.
Yeah, I think you were still living in New Hampshire.
I was living it was a syndicated column.
And then you moved here. My question is, to what extent are you self-taught as a writer and author, or what kind of experiences, training, or what did you get? Did you go to school for it?
I'm a two-time college dropout. I do not have an MFA. 2 words: my mother. My mother, and I always name her Friedel Bruiser Maynard, daughter of Jewish Russian immigrants from Ukraine, who grew up in the Depression with absolutely no money and nothing, but was a brilliant student, got herself to university and then to graduate school and then to Harvard, to Radcliffe, and got herself a PhD, summa cum laude, in the 1940s and could not get a job. She was a brilliant writer, and she, like many of our mothers of that generation, she sold encyclopedias door to door. She tutored Latin for $1 an hour, and she made sure that her 2 daughters would have a different life from hers. And we did. We are both writers. My sister is a fine writer and published writer in Canada. I will say that wasn't also great. I was raised in a boot camp of writing. We didn't play sports. We didn't, go to. I dreamed of going to a miniature golf course for some reason, or bowling. We wrote, and that was our family activity every day of my life. And my mother slashed my work. And when I teach, I say, I may seem tough, but I'm the gentler version. So yes, it was my mother, and she did eventually, like Eleanor. When her marriage was over, my father had left. She was on her own in a small New Hampshire town in her 50s, and she wrote a book and then another book and published those books, and had a few really good years as a writer, and then died way too young. But she sits on my shoulder every day, and I like to think that every single writing student of mine who has come to Guatemala or Mill Valley or Lafayette or wherever I've taught has heard the wisdom of my mother.
So we, on the heels of that question, we have a couple questions from our virtual online watchers.
Oh, great.
The first one is, do you have a...
What's the person's name?
Oh, they didn't...
Recherche.
Thank you. Okay.
Le temps perdu.
Oui. Do you have a particular time of day you write? And then can you discuss your writing process?
And I can, but it will be not helpful to anybody. I mean, everybody has to find their own. It's not like there's some magic pencil or writing program. Or I happen to be a morning person, and so I get up super early, and I don't, check social media. When I'm doing serious work, I'm doing nothing else but that. And I learned when I went back to Yale at the age of 65 as a sophomore that one of the best things I learned at Yale, and my French teacher recognized this in me when I got a D- on my first exam that I thought I'd done really well at, that I was then tested and diagnosed as having severe ADHD. And so I have to do one thing at a time, but it is a kind of a gift so I get up super early. I don't let anything else come into my world, and I don't even try to write if there are other things going on. But in August, when all of my travels, which I love, will be over, I'll go back to New Hampshire. I'm in New Hampshire in the summers, and then I come back to California, and I'll start a new book, and I don't have a clue what. And what I would say to Recherche is you need to find your own writing practice. I have my very particular one, and you have to honor what you know about your body clock, some people write a little bit every day. The one thing I will say, I so don't believe in that, like, oh, I've got to write 5,000 words a day, or I've got to write 500 words a day, or there's a lot of writers, workshops or teachers who will say things like, just get your butt in the seat. Why on earth? What's the point of putting your butt in the seat if you don't yet have something to say or know how to say it? Just sitting in the chair and typing I see no particular virtue there. So I don't always have my butt in the seat. I wait until I'm ready. And part of the writing process, incidentally, is the not writing process. I mentioned that I decided to write a sequel to this book. I then spent a full year not writing that sequel, thinking. And that was part of my writing process, thinking. And the great thing is I can't do this thinking while I'm shopping or visiting with friends, but I can do that thinking while I'm swimming or hiking or folding laundry. And so I thought about this a long time. So that's my process.
Great. Another question?
Great.
Hi, Joyce. I'm Jill. We met when my son was this big.
I remember. I connected it. Yes.
Have you considered, or are you interested in teaching fiction for those of us who want to cloak our issues and other
I have
stories?
written many more novels than I have memoirs, and I have a lot of ideas about fiction. I'll tell you why I don't. I totally, it's not even a believe. I know that every single person in this room has a story to tell. I know that. Even the people who don't think they do, and I know that I can find them, and I know that they can tell it. They may not they're not going to be quitting their day job, getting a, six-figure book contract. But I believe that everybody has a memoir or an essay that I can help them get that. When somebody comes to me with a novel that they might have been working on for 3 years, 5 years, and it's their baby, it's their precious creation, and I see trouble in that novel, and they've got 300 pages of trouble. I don't want to crush their dream. I don't want to be that person. It would be a joy to work with a fiction writer who had a piece of fiction that I could make better. And there are certainly people who have done that for me. There's a wonderful writer whose novel I'm going to recommend, Meredith Hall. She wrote a book called Beneficence that didn't get a lot of attention, but gosh, it's one of my favorite books of the last 10 years. And Meredith read a very early draft and helped me extraordinarily. And I could do that for somebody. But a whole workshop of novels, there's going to be some clunkers, and I won't make them good. And I don't want to be the one to say, rip it up. But if it's memoir, I can always help them. So I'll probably never be a fiction teacher.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Katie, and I'm a new face.
I didn't think I recognized you.
No, but I'm very happy to be here. Okay, I have 2 questions, and one is, how do you gather your ideas, or how do you find inspiration? That's one. And the other thing is about memoirs. Do you have any special tips or tricks on really gathering details from that memory or getting clearer about the memories that you want to focus on?
There are people who say, they have dozens of journals and they pore over their journals and they do all this research. And to some degree, I think that keeps them away from the writing. They get so immersed in the journals and the details that they lose the big picture. I don't do a whole lot of research. I feel that the stuff that is significant will rise to the top on its own because it had an emotional resonance. That said, I will say a few things. You have to make space for memory and emotional experience to come back to you. And when I was writing At Home in the World, which was the most painful story that I had ever faced, and it was I left New Hampshire really to write that book. I could not have told that story while I lived an hour's drive away from the man who was responsible for a lot of it. And I moved to Marin County, and at that point I had 2 teenage sons still living at home. My daughter was off at college, and I knew that I could not write that book with all the stuff of their lives, the kind of the energy field of 2 teenage boys. And I left home and went to a little cabin in Oregon and made space. And if you had asked me then, I would have said I probably have about 15 pages to tell. Can you speak more? Sure. Sorry. I would have said I probably can write about 15 pages about what happened with me when I was 18 and living with Salinger. Once I was in that cabin, and I was in a safe place to not worry about having to help my boys with homework and be cheerful at the end of the day. So much came to me. If you build it, they will come. One of the things, I happen to really believe in music as a, touching off of memory. Sometimes food is. So I do all those things. But the important stuff, you don't need to research. There was a lot of research. This book, How the Light Gets In, covers 15 years in the lives of about 8 important characters. And I was constantly having to check in, what music is playing and, who's president I knew, but, so many other things that are part of the texture of this book. I had a giant whiteboard and I was tracking, what was going on, in every year. And there I did a little bit of research, just kind of remind myself, what were the songs of 1982, and some things I knew. I'm looking at the clock and realizing that do we have time for one more question?
Yeah. Does anyone have one more question? Oh, we have one online.
Okay. And then I'm going to read a paragraph from the very end of this book.
Would you suggest starting out with a short story first?
Absolutely. Yes. Excellent idea. Maybe that was a ringer who came in. Yeah, I absolutely would. And, one of the things that I've been doing this summer, really to honor the memory of a writer I just revered who died this summer, was Alice Munro. And I decided to read every one of her short stories this summer, which suits me very well because because of my ADHD, I'm better on short stories. Read great short stories, read great writers. So yes, and good luck to you. And the short story is not a lesser thing, as we know. It's just you have a little bit more control because you have fewer pages to kind of. It's like not planting a 3-acre garden, the first time out. I'm going to finish. First of all, before I read this, I'm just going to thank you again. I honestly, I hope you've enjoyed yourself, but nobody in this room has had a better time than me tonight. That's really the truth. This is a huge gift to me. I'm going to finish with a very short passage from the end of How the Light Gets In. The thought comes to Eleanor. All this time she had it wrong. All those years she spent grieving the loss of her son's brain cells. All those years when it seemed something inside him had been broken and that nothing could ever be all right again. What she sees now is the beautiful part. There is a reason some people are broken. If nobody ever broke, if everything always turned out the way you wanted, if the sun always shone and the rain never fell, and if there was only spring and no winter, only music and no silence, only love without loneliness, where would beauty come from, or amazement? If nobody ever died, how could they know the preciousness of every day they got to be alive in the world? All this time, Eleanor could never stop mourning what had been lost, grieving what she no longer had. She made her children's sorrows her own. That may have been the thing that was hardest for Ursula, her mother's sadness that she couldn't fix. She who had tried so hard to fix everything. Eleanor understands now what it is she failed to recognize over all those years. With her gaze perpetually focused on what was gone, she had failed to recognize not simply what remained, but what lay ahead, a rocky and winding path she and her family might never have discovered if not for all the times they'd gone off course. I suspect some of you recognize where the title of this book comes from. It's the second half of a line from a Leonard Cohen song that I love called Anthem. I love many Leonard Cohen songs. And the first half is, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. When I was 35 and 40 and maybe even 55, I was still going for the uncracked life. And what I know at 70 is that it's the broken parts that actually are the biggest teachers and where a lot of the beauty lies. Thank you so much for joining me. And of course, I'm happy to sign your books.
Thank you so much. So beautifully put.